sense of introduction, but this is Rick Williams from Harmony Farm. They're one of the most awesome nurseries around, and they do a lot of stuff in the community. I know when the fires in Lake County were done burning, they wanted to replant some trees, and you could go down there and buy a tree, and they would make sure it got up there and they get it planted. And he's going to talk to us, and I also think they have one of the most biggest, my best English, supplies of drip irrigation, as I recall. And he's going to talk to us about soil. Thank you. He's also a member of the new board.
Thank you, Mark. As he was saying, we at Harmony have a complete line of irrigation supplies, fertilizers, pest controls, and a nice nursery. And I'm here today to talk about soil, actually, and one of the pressing issues associated with nutrient management in California is nitrate and phosphate management. I don't know if you're aware of this or not, but in the Central Valley and the Central Coast, farmers down there are required by law to provide a nitrogen management plan. They can't add any nitrates to their soil unless they have a permit to do so, and it supports a plan with testing because there's nitrate contamination in the groundwater down there, and it's moving north. We have some experiences in Petaluma. So I want to talk about adequate nitrate management and adequate nutrient management in the soil. Usually I start this off by talking about chemistry. Everybody took chemistry in high school? Yeah? No? Everybody? So you know what an ion is, right?
Yes.
It's a charged particle. Well, there's two types of ions. There's cations and anions. And the cations are the ones that we usually focus on when we're talking about soil management. There are a few anions that also are important. But let's just start off by talking about the ones that we know of. The nutrients everybody knows, NPK. Those are the three numbers that you see on fertilizer bags, right? You've got, 10, all sorts of variation on these things. So when it comes to nitrogen, I just want to talk about this really quickly, and why this is a contaminant is this is actually an anion, which means that it's actually negatively charged. And the reason that this is important is because nitrogen attaches to water, becomes water soluble, and that's how it ends up in the groundwater. So these are charged particles that the plant then picks up and draws up. And it takes up nitrogen through the water. The other nutrients that it takes up are positively charged ions. And we have a whole bunch of others I'll talk about in a minute. But it picks those up through what's called the hydrogen exchange, where it emits a hydrogen ion and then releases this and drops it up into the plant through a nanotube. That's the technical aspects of it. So when we talk about how much to actually add, we really need to know what our foundation level is. And just to give you an idea, when it comes to nitrates in the soil, you only need what's called 40 parts per million. I know that some of you can't see this, so I'll keep moving around. Potassium, phosphates, 40 parts per million is a good average. Potassium, we're around 200 parts per million, okay? So if we're talking about 40 parts per million, what does that mean? Everybody goes, well, it means parts in a million. It's like 40 of these to a million and something else. Well, that something else happens to be the weight. All this is done in fertilizers are all measured by weight. So if we're talking about 40 parts per million, that's 40 pounds per every million pounds of soil. So what am I supposed to do? Go out and weigh my soil and figure out how much my soil weighs? No. Actually, somebody at some point in time went around the entire world, collected all these soil samples from all over the world, weighed them all out, and they came up with a number of 2 million pounds per acre of soil 6 inches deep. And that's an average throughout the world. So when we're talking about 40 parts per million, we're really talking, if a part per million would be 2 pounds, and 2 million would be 1 part per acre, or 1 part per million. So 40 parts per million would be 80 pounds per acre of nitrogen. Now when we're talking about 10% in a package of fertilizer, the 10 stands for 10%. That's 10% by weight. So if we have a 10-pound bag, and that's 10%, that's 1 pound in that bag of nitrogen. So if we want 40, that means we want 40 pounds of that bag in an acre. And that's assuming 0. So let me just step you through that again. So if an adequate amount of nitrogen in the soil is 40 parts per million, that's 80 pounds per acre of nitrogen. So if we're talking about 1 pound in a 10-pound bag, that would mean that we only need 40 bags in that entire acre. Now when people go in and they buy it and they come into our store and they pick up a box, a 5-pound box or 10-pound box of fertilizer, and it's got, say, 10% nitrogen, and they dump that on 100 square feet or in their backyard, that's quite a bit of nitrogen, wouldn't you say? This is what's causing the nitrate contamination in our community, is because that excess nitrogen ends up percolating down into our groundwater. So that's why I want to come and talk to you all today is about this management is really key and fundamental. So we want to be very cautious about how much nitrogen we actually add to the soil. The reality is if you're adding organic matter to your soil, and organic matter means compost or not wood chips, but composted leaves or compost that you buy from your local supplier, or some sort of a aged soil amendment, that has so much nitrogen in it that you don't really need to add nitrogen fertilizer to your soil. Well, how does that organic matter that's got this nitrogen and everything else all locked up in it, how does the plant get access to that? Well, that's what soil biology is all about. And organic farming really is a fundamental, the basic fundamental principle behind organic farming and organic agriculture is really the natural processes associated with delivering nutrients to the plants. By watching different models around the world and ecosystems, they found that the healthier the soil, the healthier the plant. Well, healthy soil is really about not only what's in the soil, but about the biology in the soil. And there's an incredible ecosystem underneath the soil. There are literally, in a handful of soil, there is more biology in that soil than there is life on the surface of the planet, of the earth. That's how much activity there is in the soil. And there's an ecosystem going on down there. And there's this incredible commerce. You've got all these different organisms that are breaking down the organic matter, and they're delivering it to somebody else. Somebody else is processing it, just like our commerce that we have above ground in our societies is going on down in the soil. One bug eats this, or one bacteria eats this, its waste becomes food for something else, its waste becomes food for something else, and ultimately, it becomes food for the plants. There are two types of nitrates that are beneficial to the plants. There's nitrate nitrogen and there's ammoniacal nitrogen. Nitrate nitrogen is important for the growth of the plant and above the ground. Ammoniacal nitrogen is important for the root development. So if we only need 40 parts per million, we need to basically say, okay, well, how much is already in the soil? Well, that's what a soil test tells us. When we get a soil test, we know where our baseline soil, where the foundation is. And generally that's going to continue to replenish, but portions of it will leach out. A lot of it leaches out in our soils in California because of the type of rainfall that we have. We do live in a desert. Most people aren't aware of that. They think that, California, anything can grow here. It can. But the types of rainfall that we get are over a short period of time, and heavy rainfall leaches out these nutrients, or the nitrogen out of the soil. And that's how it gets down into the groundwater. So we need to replenish that periodically through either organic fertilizer or organic material, or supplementing with some sort of a fertilizer. a 10-10. I prefer to say, you know, use just if you just need nitrogen, eliminate and get something that has a 0-0. Okay. Believe it or not, but there is so much potassium in our soil, or phosphates in our soils around here, that you don't need to add phosphates. Most people think I need to add phosphates to get my flowers to grow in order to produce fruit. That's not necessary in our soils around here. We do literally hundreds of soil tests a year. And I look at those soil tests, and generally speaking, the average phosphate levels in the soils around here are about 80 parts per million. If we only need 40, we already have too much. Now, if we put more on the soil, this particular particle attaches to erodible material. It sticks to little pieces of organic matter that's on the surface of the soil or in the soil. So these heavy rainfalls come down and really wash these phosphates out into our inland waterways. And that's why we have the algae blooms. And I'm sure you've been paying attention to the news and you've heard about all these pot growers that are contaminating the waterways. That's how it's happening. These guys are coming out there, they're dumping huge amounts of nitrates on the soil in order to get this huge growth. And they come in and they're dumping huge amounts of phosphates on the soil because they think that that actually produces flowers. But that's not what's going on. High phosphates in the soil lock out micronutrients like zinc and iron. If we have high phosphates, we don't get this because the plant can't bring these up if there's high phosphate. So zinc is important for growth hormones. If you don't have zinc uptake in the plant, it can't produce growth hormones and you get no growth. If you don't get iron, you don't get chlorophyll development. So without these two components, you're restricting the plant's ability to grow. That's what's forcing it to flower, because the plant it's triggering a reproductive process and saying, okay, if I can't grow, then I'm gonna die. If it's an annual, I'm gonna die. And so I need to produce seeds and flowers in order for me to take care of the next generation. So what's important about phosphate? Anybody know? Phosphate is the key element of the development of DNA. Without phosphate, you don't have DNA. If you don't have DNA, you can't produce new cells because you have cell replication, mitosis. So that's the only thing that phosphate's used for. So it helps to produce seeds, it helps to produce flowers, it helps to produce new cells. So when they do this and they push this and they create a high amount of this, which we don't want to do because we want the plant to go through a natural process. So when we get people coming in here and they want to get fertilizers in order to produce bigger flowers, and they've been told that they need to put 10-10-10 or 0-10-10 or 0-10-0. I always say, well, have you done a soil test? Well, no, I haven't, but my plants aren't doing well. And I say, okay, what's your pH? Anybody know what pH is? Okay. I'm going to flip this. pH is probably the most important aspect of soil and the most underrated and understated. Okay. The reason that it's important is you have a range, and it goes all the way from 0, which is extremely acidic, probably never see a 0, all the way up to 14. We'll call it 15. But most soils around here are going to be anywhere from about 5.5 to 8.5. 7 being neutral. Neutral it has no charge. There are no everything's in balance. There's no particular charge to whatever the element is. We usually measure pH in terms of water, in terms of soil. Our bodies actually have a low pH. We have acids in our stomachs that help to break down the nutrients that deliver to our cells and keep us healthy. soil is not any different. It likes, the soil optimally is about 6.5. At 6.5, the biology likes that because it's helping to break down the organic matter and deliver nutrients. Also, at that point, all the micronutrients and all the macronutrients are all at the optimum availability all at the same time. If you have a high pH, your macronutrients, your nitrogen, your phosphate, potassium, calcium, sulfur, magnesium, become excessively available. And the micronutrients, which produce hormones and enzymes, are unavailable. So the higher the pH, the harder it is for the plant to develop hormones and enzymes